In part 2 of this one-part series, we looked more broadly at a video by Cameron from the Capturing Christianity channel. In this video, we're going to be getting more specific, so take it, Cam.
The second point, even if it's true there's no evidence for God, that doesn't necessarily mean that God doesn't exist. You might have heard the saying, absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. So before we found evidence for the Big Bang, for example, that didn't mean that the Big Bang didn't happen. The fact that we lack evidence really only means that we lack evidence.
Yes, Captain Obvious. A lack of evidence means only that we lack evidence. But is defending a lack of evidence really a defense of everything for which we lack evidence? Would you like to defend the claims of the Book of Mormon likewise? I suspect Cameron and I both dismiss extraordinary claims for which we are lacking evidence, with one very obvious exception.
Even if it's true that there's no evidence for God, and I'll talk about that in a moment, it doesn't necessarily follow that we have some kind of argument against God's existence.
You don't need an argument against the existence of God. The existence of God is not evident. That's what needs to be demonstrated with evidence. If you don't have any, the claim is dismissed without prejudice until some evidence is proffered. But you're not doing that.
But the real issue here, and this is my third point, is that there's plenty of evidence for God. I mean, we don't even have to call it real evidence. We can call it candidate evidence.
Well, I'll agree with Cameron here. It's not real evidence, and we certainly shouldn't call it that.
By candidate evidence, I mean data and phenomena that professional philosophers have argued counts in favor of God's existence. I'll repeat that. By candidate evidence, I mean data and phenomena that professionals have argued counts in favor of God's existence.
Professional arguments are still just arguments. They're not evidence. They demonstrate nothing outside pure mathematics. And here we see once again the difference between science and religion. In science, you must have the evidence. If you don't, no credential in the world will get your unevidenced claim accepted and embraced by the scientific community. The existence of an actual being, God, Bigfoot, fairies, is a claim demanding evidence, not just arguments, however professional those arguments might be.
No, the arguments that I'm talking about as candidates are those that have been submitted by professionals in cosmology and in physics and philosophy, and they've submitted these to journals for peer review. So here's just a couple examples of the type of candidate evidence I'm talking about. The first one is the universe itself. There's got to be some reason why our universe has billions of galaxies instead of billions of slimy triangles. And you can't actually use the universe itself to explain this. That'd be like explaining the existence of a chicken in terms of the chicken. I mean, that's circular. So the question we face then is, well, what type of thing could create the entire universe? God could.
Yes, that's true, but the concept of God was created by humans to answer that question. So, of course, your theoretical God can create the thing he was created to create. That doesn't mean he exists. In order to answer that question, we'll need actual evidence, because right now, there are other options which don't require magic, which makes them far more probable and likely.
And some philosophers are actually arguing right now, in fact, I interviewed one recently for our podcast, is that only a being like God, in other words, a perfect being, only that kind of being would be a sufficient explanation for the entire universe. And keep in mind, this is just one piece of evidence. I've actually discussed this with another atheist, Cosmic Skeptic. You can watch the video there. I've got it either on this side or this side, whatever. The second piece of evidence, philosophers have argued...
Hold it right there. Philosophers making arguments is not evidence. The very fact that philosophers and theologians have nothing more than arguments makes the point. There is no evidence. If there were, they'd simply present it, rather than trying to argue and reason their way to a conclusion. A conclusion, I might add, they already embraced prior to their argument. It's not like the evidence led them to this argument. The argument was created in lieu of evidence.
Philosophers have argued that the fact that we can even trust our brains at all to produce accurate beliefs about the world is evidence for God. Third, they've argued that the order and fine-tuning in our universe is very, very strong evidence for God. Fourth, they've argued that the fact that our universe can actually be discovered by science itself Oh, and that it's also written in the language of mathematics is evidence for God. Fifth, professionals have argued that beauty is actually evidence for God. Then there's the argument from miracles and the argument from consciousness. The list of candidate evidence is actually pretty long.
Awesome. Now, if we can just get some actual evidence. And by the way, what exactly would it take to convert this candidate evidence into actual evidence? Are there experiments being done to test these arguments? Are there predictions these arguments make which we can observe? Or are we just finished before we've done anything to find out whether these arguments are simply more claims for which we are lacking evidence?
So here's an analogy I want you to think about. Wouldn't it be kind of silly if I was making a video, 20 arguments against evolution, and started out by saying, well, there's just no evidence? Like, would anyone take me seriously, or would any serious person take me seriously? I doubt it. What you'd have to do, like any honest human being would, is deal with the best evidence for that position. So here's my fourth and last point.
Wait, you just said that professionals have argued is your fifth point. If there's a whole nother point, we're going to have to pick that up in part D. Until then, I'm me. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching. As many of you know, prior to the pandemic, I had two side hustles bringing in money: video production jobs and renting out my cinema gear. When those died out, my patrons stepped up, boosting their contributions and supporting more videos per month, for which I am endlessly grateful. My patrons are amazing. Thanks, gang. Unfortunately, I'm still not exactly where I need to be. So a friend of mine suggested I start doing TikTok. I wasn't crazy about that idea, but while looking into it, I discovered all kinds of ways to make money that I have never even dreamed of. For instance, this young woman is making a ton of money selling her flurries, her gusts, her breezes, whirlwinds, tempests, puffs. Whatever you want to call it, this woman is apparently making a lot of money bottling things up, or not, and shipping them out. I said shipping. And all because, according to her, she's got a good personality and she's hot. So I thought to myself, hey, I'm kind of hot for my age and I have a good personality. I certainly don't need to make anywhere near the kind of money she's making. Surely there are a few people out there, maybe you, who would want my farther along this line of thinking, though, I started thinking about the possible lifestyle changes involved. I mean, I'd have to severely change my diet, for one, right? And I know what you're thinking. No, there is no anti-Beano, anti-Gas-X type pill you can take to induce a tiny typhoon. Plus, I have no idea how she's actually bottling these things up. Is it painful? Are there workers involved? Would I have to pay them, or is that some kind of fetish thing you can find on Tinder or Craigslist? I mean, the workers' comp costs would be through the roof, right? I mean, I couldn't afford that. Could I even find people who, if they wanted to do it for free, would be skilled in this trade, who had the kind of manual dexterity and poor sense of smell that I'd need, who would also be discreet? So lots of questions. Having said all that, I decided to keep that option in my back pocket and come here and say to you, hey, you, if you like these videos and you can afford to do anything to keep them squeaking out, head on over to Patreon and sign up to become a patron. You'll not only be making this enlightening, humorous content available to those who can't afford to help out, but now you'll be making the world a safer, fresher, far less fragrant place. You'll be helping the environment. That's patreon.com/Mr. Deity. The link is below in the description. And to everyone else who's already helped out in whatever way, you know what I'm going to say. Thank you. And I'll see you real soon. Whoops. Sorry.